Hey everyone, good morning. How's everybody doing? Happy Tuesday here. Hope everybody's having a good day. Pretty big move in the market today. We actually kind of have a gap bully here in the market. We've been talking about this 60-minute area consolidation, whether or not we were going to break out of it or not. We did break out of this consolidation, and we'll see if we can confirm higher here and trigger this daily buy setup in the Qs. But we did get a nice move in the market today, which was pretty good, breaking out of this congestion area. I wanted to come on and do a video. It's actually going to be a 4-part video. I've gotten a lot of questions about scanning and about how I find patterns, when I scan, what are the stuff that I look for when I'm scanning, and so I wanted to do a 4-part video on the different times that I scan and how I go about that. Okay, so the first thing is I'm a pattern day trader, right? So, and a discretionary trader. So I'm looking for patterns in the market, right? And so my day trading universe consists roughly of about 1,000, 1,100 stocks, somewhere around there. For that, stocks that do enough volume, enough liquidity for me to trade. And so although I can look at probably 120 different stocks at any one time, it's nearly impossible for me to watch all the stocks in my universe. Okay, so I wanted to kind of just give a walkthrough over how do I kind of condense my universe down through scanning, and how I lay symbols out throughout the day, develop my watch list, and kind of progress through the day as we change time frames and what I'm watching for and how I'm scanning for those setups. All right, so I think I'm going to do this every day the rest of the week, so it should be 4 parts. Today we're going to cover gaps, which is the first thing I look for at the open. Tomorrow we'll look at scanning for relative strength, relative weakness on the 5-minute time periods, which I normally do when I'm moderating. Then we'll look at scanning for 15-minute patterns, and we will also look at how I transfer the gaps list to look for swing trades. Okay, so that's kind of the agenda for the next couple of days. So a couple of things I want to get out of the way before we jump into this, because we're going to go over a lot of stuff. One is being a member of the Black Room increases my odds tremendously to find patterns, right? So we kind of trade, a lot of us, we have different nuances, but we really trade the same patterns, right? And so being a member of a room, looking for things and looking at like, okay, is this there's a 5-minute buy setup setting in the Qs. The Qs look like they may want to break out of the base, right? So since we're looking at similar patterns, being a member of the room also is kind of a part of scanning, because there's a lot of guys, a lot of women in the room that are scanning throughout the day, and people find stuff all the time that I don't have. Okay, so that's one thing as part of in addition to the scanning that I do, is that I get a lot of setups from that, right? Ifan and Sammy put out a lot of stuff that I don't have, right? Every morning, Ifan normally puts out an additional gaps list that I use, right? So all this stuff is really, really beneficial as far as being part of a room, okay? So I wanted to mention that, and I also wanted to mention that I have developed a couple of scans that find, like for climactics, gap areas, and gap bullies and stuff, where I've used, and I'm not associated with any scanning platform or website or anything like that, just T3, right? But I have used TOS to develop scans to kind of find patterns automatically by scanning for things. But by far, the best way that I found scanning is to look at charts, right? Look at charts. That's the best way that I have found to scan, is to somehow look at a whole bunch of charts that filter out. Okay, so let's start, and that includes gaps too. Okay, so in the morning, okay, we'll start with the gaps list. Now I put my, let me pull this up here. So this is not my current watch list. I took a picture of, this is the watch list that I brought into the open, and I reset it to what I had at 9:25. Okay, this is the watch list that I brought to the open, but this is the watch list that I had, that I was working on pre-market, okay? And these are the gap downs and these are the gap ups. Now, there were a bunch of other gaps that were on here, but if they weren't even close to good, if they weren't gapping enough, then I ended up just deleting them, okay? So what I do is about an hour or so before the market opens, working on swing trades, doing a couple things, and I start to develop the gaps list. Right, I get additional gaps from members in the room. I have a couple scans that I can run. There's a lot of free scans out there and stuff. I also use FinViz after 9 o'clock, and I'm scanning for gaps. Okay, and I develop a gaps list. Now, from this gaps list that I have here, let me make sure we can see this. Okay, from the longs and, from the gap ups and the gap downs, I transfer to my hot list here. Okay, so I run through these gaps on 4 different time frames at the same time. So I'm looking at 60-minute daily chart, weekly chart, and monthly chart. Okay, and I'm doing my gap analysis that we teach in our gaps class as I'm looking at those 4 different time frames. All right, so before the open, I develop my gaps list. I'm adding additional gaps, and then I'm scanning for these gaps to look for setups. All right. Now, when I get a gap that I think is interesting, I add it to my hot list here. Okay, and I do this in order where tier 1 gaps go right at the top. These are tier 2 gaps that I'm looking at. And then these are additional gaps that, these are additional gaps that are really low tier, but if they do start to trend, then I can take them in the direction of the trend as a professional gap. And then the Fran down here was separated because it was actually a novice gap down, and I was looking to play it long, but it was not a professional gap. The rest of these were on here because they were pro gaps. All right, so I separate, once I find the gaps that I like, I'm doing my gaps analysis on the 4 different time frames. I start to separate these into different tiers, ranking systems, and that's what I bring into the market open. All right, so if we look at this, I'm going to take this list down because that was the gaps list, and then this is what was derived from that. So if we look at this, I'll just go over these top ones. So the LMNR was my favorite gap down today. All right, had a lot of shock value on this, and once this daily chart loads, had a lot of shock value on this. The reason why it wasn't a tier 1, all this was really good, was because it gapped too far. Right. Gapping under this base here, 29.50 or so, it would have been a tier 1. But because it gapped so far, it didn't make it as a tier 1. It went into the tier 2 slot. Okay, YUMC, which was the only trade that I called today, which was a small loser, just close to a target 1, but couldn't quite get it there. We played this at the open. Okay, YUMC was a tier 2. And the reason being was because we were gapping right underneath the support, but we were coming from a red bar, so it wasn't a tier 1. Okay? Now the CRE, which we'll talk about in a second here, was a tier 2, but it didn't clear. Okay? I was looking for it to gap up at least above $46, $45.90 there to clear, but it did not clear. Okay? So, and the LMNR got bought right at the open. So, at the open, as far as the setups that I'm looking for, whether it's 1, 2, 3s, whether it's doji bar, high-low entry, whatever failed buy setup, which is kind of what the YUMC was, I know what entry pattern I can take in correlation to the gap. Okay, so I know if this is tier 1, I can take pretty much any entry on it that I have in my playbook if it's tier 1. Okay, if it's tier 2, then depending on the gap, I can play over the doji bar, right? So the short today was it was a failed buy setup, right? It was a retest under this candle's low, stop above this topping tail, and we got a nice drop, and we got 5 cents from target, but ended up trailing the rest over this bar's high here, right? So it was roughly a break-even trade, very small loser. Just couldn't get it to trend all day, right? And honestly, it's at the high of the day, so I'm glad that we got out of it when we did. So the tier that I assign before the market opens is also in direct correlation with the entry pattern that I can take. Okay, so I start with the gaps list, I go through the gaps analysis, and then I jump to the watch list here, and I organize them in different tiers and in their ranking, and then I lay them out on charts in front of me. Now, I want to show you guys now I need to take the chart trader off, okay, and I'm going to take a picture. Hey Steve, how are you? So once I do the layout, I should have done this before, but I just want to show you guys a picture of what I'm looking at the open here. Okay, so this is the let me save this, and I'm just going to show you how I lay this out. Okay, yes, okay, this is coming up. So this is the YUM-C here, right? And normally I have my chart trader over here, and this is a 1-minute chart. So when I was looking at the YUM-C, I put the 1-minute chart, right? Let me move this down a little bit. Okay, so I have a large 1-minute chart that I'm looking to trade off of at the open. I also have a smaller 2-minute chart here, and then I have a daily chart here. Okay, so at the open, because there's a lot going on, I'm trying to post calls officially. First and foremost, trying to put my orders into the system, and I also want to check to make sure that the stocks are gapping in the same location, right? So there's a lot going on. So as far as my layout for the YUM-C, I have a bunch of thumbnails on monitors above me, but on the 3 monitors below that I trade off of, I have 6 boxes like this. All of them have a 1-minute. They have my chart trader here, which I took off just because I don't want to show my account number, and then I have a 2-minute chart and a daily chart. So when the market opens and we get a stock like Cree, which opened, I'm immediately looking at this daily chart, and I'm seeing that, okay, this didn't clear. This didn't do what it wants. Do what I wanted it to do. It didn't gap up enough to clear, so it's no longer a tier 2 gap for me. And how am I seeing that? Well, yeah, I'm watching the 1-minute here, but I also see the daily chart to confirm what's going on as far as the intraday. Okay, and then I'm also looking at the 2-minute chart because the transition into 2-minute happens in the first 30 minutes, but I'm also looking for like a 2-minute high-low or a 2-minute 1, 2, 3, right? Patterns like that. So I'm looking at 3 time frames right at the open. Okay, so as far as the gaps, and I know we kind of covered quite a bit here, but as far as the gaps list, we started out with this gaps list. Okay, whoops. We started out with this gaps list. Pre-market, which I use a couple scanners. I use room members. We have a couple of really phenomenal room members that attribute to gaps. Oh, there's one thing that really important that I forgot too. So I start with the gaps list. I go through my 4 time frame assessment: 60-minute daily chart, weekly chart, monthly chart. I organize them in as far as what tier they are, which is what we teach in the gaps class. And then that is associated with what I can play right at the open. the tier 2 gaps and tier 1 gaps go on charts as layout like this. Okay? Now, before the open, another thing that's really, really important, which I can't believe I almost forgot about this, is that once I lay these charts out before the market opens, is I look, and this is me personally, I could care less about the news, but I do care if something is a secondary, and I also care if something is ex-dividend, which normally most of those are associated with gap downs. So I will run through the gap downs that I have on my list, and I will look up whether or not they're a secondary or they're an ex-dividend. Okay? Whether you're looking at a news source, you can do it with analyzing some volume and stuff on the charts. If they're doing a lot of volume pre-market, then they're most likely a secondary. Percent change you can use to see if they're ex-dividend or not, right? So there's many ways to do that, but just using any sort of news source or Yahoo Finance is something that I use pretty often. Then I'll be able to see whether or not something is a secondary or whether or not something is ex-dividend. And the reason why that's important to me is because that's an external disruption in price action that has a direct implication on a change of supply and demand. Okay? As in, like a secondary, there's an issue, there's a new issue of additional shares, right? It's not price, it's not a shift in supply and demand, it's not a shift in price action from supply and demand, it's actually a change in supply from an external source. Same thing with the ex-dividend, right? They're issuing a dividend, so the price is changing because they issued a dividend. All right? And those two things will erode the analysis that I use in analyzing gaps because it's an external source directly implying a difference in supply and demand. Man, I'm having trouble wording that, but I'm sure you guys understand what I'm referring to, right? Ex-dividend gap doesn't have any shock value because people that held it the day before got a dividend. Okay, so one last time, real quick. We start with the gaps list, right? We build the gaps list through scanners, through room members, right? We go over ranking the gaps list on multiple time frames. Sammy also does that in the open before the market opens as well, which is absolutely phenomenal. It's one of the highlights of being a member of the Black Room is that we do gaps analysis, and then I rank them as far as tiers, check if they're secondary or ex-dividend, and then from my tiers I know which intraday patterns I can look for, and then from that the tier 2 and tier 3 gaps go on these 3 time frame arrays, and then I'm ready for the open. All right, so that's how I prepare for the open as far as scanning and developing the gaps list. I've gotten quite a few questions about this, so hopefully it was helpful. Let me know if you guys have any other questions as we go through this. Tomorrow we'll look at additional scanning that I do around 10:15, which is the next time frame, and then Thursday we'll look at 15-minute patterns, and then Friday we'll take a look at what I do with this gaps list. Okay? All right, guys, let me know if you have any other questions. Hopefully it was helpful. As always, stay in process. Actually getting not a bad 5-minute buy setup in the Qs here. Let's take a look at the Qs. And yeah, I'll see if we get any follow through on this. Not a bad 5-minute buy setup. Yeah. See if we can follow through on this daily buy setup here and keep this daily trend intact on the Qs. Whoops, I meant to go to 5-minute here. 5-minute buy setup. Okay, I will talk to you guys later. Stay in process, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day.